We welcome again our Adjunct Professor Hassan Muthalib to our Asian cinema class in the Master of Communication program. So students are still coming in one by one. Good evening, Pak Hassan.
Good evening.
You want to start now?
Yeah. Or
Okay.
you want to wait for another few minutes while maybe we can have an intro?
Yes. You want to introduce your cat, I believe.
My cat also wants to know about Malaysian cinema.
Yes.
Okay, so will tomorrow's group be the same?
No, it's a different class. That one is the undergraduate for film studies.
Okay.
This one is the master students for Asian cinema. So this is more advanced actually, Pak Hassan.
Do they already have a basic understanding of the indie scene?
For what? For tonight or tomorrow?
For tonight.
For tonight, they have watched Talent Time. Because most of them are students from China. I believe they have zero knowledge. Yes.
Okay.
Apart from maybe the two Malaysians know a bit about independent Malaysian cinema. Don't you, Mei Yuen and also Dashini? What do you know about the independent filmmakers in Malaysia? Mei Yuen, Dashini? You there?
Any knowledge at all?
Yes, Dashini.
In terms of independent filmmakers, it is still growing in Malaysia. It's not as recognized compared to the mainstream filmmakers.
Okay, but I think it could be similar to other countries like China, Indonesia, and so on. They all began with short films, and then slowly graduated to making features. And by that time, already digital cinema was a reality. So in a sense, they already predicted it by doing on mini DV and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now you want to start?
I'll be given an idea of that movement, the digital independent movement, and I'll end with how the mainstream cinema also took over what we term as Malaysian cinema, where Chinese, Indian, Malays, and even Kadazan Dusuns from Sabah and also from Sarawak have gotten into the mainstream industry. So only a few managed to make it to the mainstream, but ultimately it's about whether the audience is there. So if they are too independent, so it's not so good. And some studios have stopped making films. That's the problem. Yeah. So I'll be showing a lot of visuals, and you'll find it easy to follow.
Yeah, and you'll be giving an analysis on
Talent
Time, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they have prepared themselves by watching that before this class, Pak Hassan.
Okay.
Okay, so can I just go ahead with the slides, Pak Hassan?
Yeah, you can go to the first slide.
Okay. So just cue me, Pak Hassan?
Yeah, all right.
Okay, all yours.
Now I have to minimize this. Do I click on view?
Try and press escape.
Okay, view, exit full screen, is it?
Yes, exit full screen.
Okay. And now I got to go and look at my notes.
Okay.
Just to... Okay, I got it here.
Okay.
All right. Just a moment.
I hope the students can be patient. Pak Hassan, you are now 75, right, Pak Hassan?
77.
77, yeah. So students at 77, he is still on Zoom. So be patient with him, okay?
Okay, so now I'll start with the first slide.
Okay.
So from 1934, when the first film was made, called Layla Majnun, a Persian tale that means love struck Layla. So Majnun means like being a bit crazy in love. So now from 1934 to 1999, it was only a Malay cinema. Then the millennium, we saw something totally new, a revolution happened, and what is termed as a Malaysian cinema came into being, from being a Malay cinema all this while. And all that while, it was only as if only the Malays had problems. The Chinese were okay, the Indians were okay. But from the year 2000 onwards, we began to see something very different, and the outside world began to take notice of our cinema. So it happened both independently, and then also later, very much later, about close to 15 years later, mainstream cinema also took over the challenge. So, second slide.
Yeah, but before that, if I may ask, Pak Hassan, you mentioned just now that during the time of Malay cinema until 1999, you mentioned that as if only the Malays had problems, but not the other races. So why did you use the word problem, Pak Hassan? What do you mean by that?
Because what we see on the screen are the conflicts or the issues, many issues relating to religion, relating to culture, and so on, was brought out on the screen, and about how young people were not into the actual art forms. They didn't understand about what was in their roots, so they were behaving too much like a Westerner in Malaysia.
Yeah, this reminds me of a webinar that we had with our adjunct professor and also filmmaker Din Said about a couple of months back, Pak Hassan.
Yes.
We were talking about representations in cinema as in general, you know, not just Malaysian cinema, representation in cinema. So could this also be that until 1999, other races in Malaysia who are also Malaysians did not have screen representations in films?
Yeah, in Singapore, they were only used as comedy relief, and to a certain extent, in contemporary Malaysian cinema, they were only included as comedy relief, or they had very, very minor roles, not being foregrounded like the protagonists, which underwent a major change from the year 2000 onwards.
Yeah, and adjunct Professor Din Said also mentioned that it's very typical of not just in Malay cinema, but even in Hollywood as well, to have stereotypes of the other races, Pak Hassan.
Yeah, that happened. I'm going to show two slides after this.
Okay, all right.
All right. So I was saying that possibly what these indie filmmakers did has influenced today's contemporary filmmakers in the present time about including multi-ethnic representation. So I'm looking at the roots because this has got some relevance to what I'm going to talk about later about the indie filmmakers. So the filmmaker as storyteller. So we are going to look at the stories, the identity, and their roots. Where does all this come from? Okay, next slide. So Dr. Ghaus Nasaruddin, formerly of University of Science Malaysia, he mentioned in his book, Traditional Malay Theatre, that traditional Malay theatre is a microcosm of the Malay cosmology formed from animistic Hindu and Islamic beliefs. And there is a reason for them to consider this from the religious point of view. There is a constant need to maintain the well-being of the community and preserve the cosmic and metaphysical psyche of the Malays. So their behavior and whatever they do has got some relevance or connection to their religious beliefs. So they believe that when something is wrong in the village, that means somebody has transgressed something and so on. So traditional Malay theatre, and if you take into account shadow play and other theatre like Mat Yong and so on, menorah and so on, there is a very long ritual at the beginning where they appeal to their masters and the masters before them, and sometimes for the non-Muslims, they also appeal to their own gods and goddesses. So next slide. And these are the early storytellers. The guy with the pot is actually a pot. He's called slips my mind for the moment. He will be called from time to time to weddings and certain ceremonies where he will recite his stories. And he also has a very long ritual at the beginning before he actually begins. And then in the village, there are even storytellers who will play violins. They don't know how to read notes, but they can play the violins. And kids especially are very enamored by this. Now this still photo is from Muhammad Khalid's film. I think it's one of the rock movies to depict in a sense where did these rock singers get their talent from. So possibly for him, it is from their fathers or grandfathers or great-grandfathers. It runs in the blood. So how can you avoid that? And then the Indians with their dance, and their dances are all related to the religion, and there is supplication, and their stories are coming from their religious texts and so on. Similarly, or maybe not so similarly for the Chinese opera, which was very popular at one time. I remember seeing this in my village. They had set up a stage, and then these actors on stage, and they did some fantastic visual effects. They had clouds moving in the background. I don't know how they did it at that time. I don't know whether it was back projection or they were running cotton using rails, possible. Then at the bottom is the makyung, the Malay makyung. This is the court makyung. There are two kinds of makyung. One is the village makyung. The other one is the court, where to perform in front of the king, you have to have these elaborate costumes, and there is this lute player in the foreground. So everything begins with him playing the lute, and this is what they call menghadap rebab, facing the lute player. So he, in a sense, starts the ball rolling. On the bottom right-hand side is the bangsawan, or Malay opera. So this actually originated from Sri Lanka through the Parsi theatre, came to Penang, then from Penang it made its way down to Singapore, and then went over to Indonesia. So all these people, they were actually very religious. They may not pray, but they were also quite spiritual. So all this traditional theatre, storytelling and so on was deeply rooted, and they felt that it was an obligation to them and not just a performance to get money. Okay, next. So Professor Muhammad Haji Saleh has written two very good books, which I must strongly recommend for all lecturers in film, mass comm, animation, and also for students to understand the mind of the Malay author and how traditional or classical Malay literature was written in the early days, which is totally different from what we are doing now. So he said that it is through his remembered oral stories from his grandmother that the wayang kulit, the shadow play, and dance drama like the menorah and makyung, from the hikayat, the traditional Malay stories, these are the important part of who he was and who we all are as Malaysians, and part of a wide-ranging Malay language literature. So the Malays were immigrants, the Chinese were immigrants, the Indians were immigrants to this country. So the Malays probably came first from Indonesia, Sumatra, and so on. So they brought with them certain aspects of their culture and their performing arts. And then when the Chinese came, some of it was assimilated both ways, and also the Indians. And of course, the Malay language is made up of the Sanskrit, and a lot of Hindu aspects of Hindu culture is in Malay culture. So Professor Muhammad Haji Saleh has explored all this to see how did these people in those days think about what they do and where did it all come from. There were no schools and so on. Next. So in his book, The Mind of the Malay Author, he says that the artist always sees himself against the background of the spiritual, social, court, and literary environment and tradition. So he was aware and he observed what was around him. And it is only in the interaction with all these aspects of his life that his meaning as artist and his work as literature may achieve any significance at all. So today, if we look at the poems and the literature written in those days, they were actually written to be heard, not to be read, because hardly anybody knew how to read or write. And then much of it underwent change when the Malays, from being Buddhists and Hindus, became Muslims. So much of the names of the gods and goddesses were changed to fit the Islamic requirements. Okay, next. So if you look at the main characters of shadow play, Malay shadow play, which is different from Indonesian, you can see you have Sri Rama, who today, if you look at Star Wars characters, they are exactly the same. So Sri Rama stands for Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia is Sita Devi, Darth Vader is the villain, Ravana, and he's holding a lightsaber, and his body is black. Darth Vader is covered in black. And then C-3PO is actually Wat Dogol, the jester. So in those days, a jester is very important to break the what you call the seriousness of drama. Okay, next. And in the early days in Singapore, much of the story sources came from Malay legends, Malay beliefs, Middle Eastern stories, Indian stories, and also copies from Hollywood, like Frankenstein and South Seas romantic stories. Next. So now the next generation in Kuala Lumpur, leaving Singapore behind, and after 1979. So nothing to talk about from 1960 to 1970, because they were mainly made for entertainment, and not much research was done into what they were making, except maybe for one or two. I remember seeing quite a lot of it, but I wasn't keen on cinema yet. So a lot of things I can't remember. So the contemporary filmmakers were affected by socio-economic, political, and cultural issues, and then also of the post-independence mood and the new economic policy from 1970 onwards that tried to restructure society so that the Indians were not identified by working on the estates, the Chinese only working in the cities, being jewelers and doing all this business, and the Malays were more identified with agriculture and fisheries. So the new economic policy brought many Malays into the city, and they went to college, and they came out and started to their lot increased, became better, and that actually caused a problem, which we will see after this in the films made by our filmmakers in the 1980s. Next. So in 1979, Said Alwi, a very prominent playwright who was a graduate of film and theater from the US, he made a 5-episode TV drama, but at the time it was shot on 16mm film. And so he made a 45-minute cut down on film, and I and a few others were the only people who have seen it at that time. But the film, I think, is not traceable anymore. So it was about the loss of values and traditions among young people. So it was about this vagabond medicine seller standing at the window. He goes around the country selling oils and other medicine. And then he stops at a small town and he falls into a faint. And then he's taken into the house of this widow and 3 children. And then slowly through them, we begin to discover many things about how he learned from his master. And it was a spiritual way of learning, which one of the widow's children, a young man, wants to be like him, but he cannot get it. So I see the same thing being shown in Garin Nugroho's film called Bulan Tertusuk Ilalang, made in Indonesia. He is basically talking about the same thing, that the young people of today, they are learning the arts, they are learning music, they are learning film, they are learning animation, but do they really understand what it's all about? So as I mentioned about the early storytellers, they and their art were one. It's not just something that they do after they finish their work. There is no separation between them, just like the samurai and his sword. The samurai is nothing without his sword. So he and the sword are one. So Tok Perak, at the end, goes back to his medicine selling alone, leaving behind all this. And then only we discover that when he fainted, all the things that happened were actually a dream. So Yasmin Ahmad has also done this in Gubra, which I will mention later. Next. So Rahim Razali was acting with Said Alwi. So he was one of the favorite actors of Said Alwi. And I can say that he was a protege. So when he became a filmmaker, he more or less echoed what Said Alwi was also projecting or representing in his films. So in the film Abang, his first film, he was talking about modern Malaysia 10 years after the new economic policy. How have the people changed, or have they changed? So in Abang, he shows a very successful family that has got a holdings as compared to before, when the Malays hardly had any footing in the big city. So, so Abang was about a modern nation grappling with issues of economics, politics, religion, culture, nation, and identity. And Rahim Razali contrasted the life in the city to the life in the village. So there are scenes where he goes back to the village, then he enjoys everything as he did when he was young, before he came to the city. So it was actually a very long film, and I saw the first version, which was almost 3 hours, before it was cut down to about 2 hours. So it was edited in my studio in Film Negara, where I was working. So still at that time, I wasn't interested yet. But in Sufi Sofia, he had a Chinese woman who wanted to become a Muslim. But when she came to this island, and I think the island was supposed to represent Langkawi, she found a totally different scenario, that the Muslims were quarreling with Muslims. So it becomes very confusing for her, and in the end, she gets kidnapped by the fundamentalists. So this is a very well-made film in terms of narrative. But Rahim Razali was not very adept at directing, because he did not understand the role of the camera, and neither did the director of photography at that time. So I was there when during the making, and I actually designed the Sufi Sofia title for the film. Okay, next. And the reference to classical Malay literature. In this case, the Malay Annals or Sejarah Melayu, where there is this famous story of Hang Tuah and his 4 friends. And in the end, there is a fight between him and his right-hand man, Hang Jebat, and Hang Tuah ends up killing him, all because he ran amok. But he ran amok for a reason. He thought the Sultan, the king, had ordered the death of Hang Tuah, because some of the ministers didn't like Hang Tuah, and so they created stories. And the Sultan, without even investigating, he ordered the killing of Hang Tuah. But the minister who was in charge, he did a very clever thing. He hid Hang Tuah somewhere for some years until Hang Jebat started to run amok and the king fled. And of course, the minister now went to the king and said, if Hang Tuah was still alive, would you forgive him? And of course, the king said, definitely. And he revealed that Hang Tuah was still alive. So then Hang Tuah was ordered to capture Hang Jebat. But the problem was the invincible dagger, the kris, that Hang Tuah had all this while had been given to Hang Jebat. So now it was going to be a problem. So when Rahim Razali made Matinya Seorang Patriot, or Death of a Patriot, this was his reference. There are 5 brothers, just like Hang Tuah, the 5 of them. And then at the end, the eldest brother fights with the younger brother over a girl. And Isteri Perempuan dan Jalang, who weighs firm, similarly, at the end, we have 2 Malays fighting each other, and then the guy on the right gets killed together with the woman that they are fighting for. And in my film, Legendary Silat Warriors, Malaysia's first animated feature film, we also referred in the first 4 minutes of the film, in the prologue, the reference to Hang Tuah and the discord that happens in the court of Malacca, where the 5 brothers, the 5 Silat warriors broke up. So the master, the grandmaster, standing on the left, tells his best student, one of his best students, that be very careful. The woman who has lost the fight with you is going to create problem in the future. So you must deliver the 5 magical weapons to these 5 warriors when the time is right. But when is the time is right? It will be in the 21st century, where there is time travel. So we took the traditional and brought it to the modern. Next. So Hafsham, who was trained in London in film and was working in my studio when I came to work in 1968, he was a producer there, and he was making some very good documentary films, and I did titling for him. Now, in his first film called Adik Manja, or Cute Child, we already saw a different kind of comedy, a different kind of acting, a different kind of story. So he was a man who was very open-minded, so he had all races in his film. So what he put forward was a very benign, multi-ethnic society. And you can see his character as a man who was very well-mannered, showing his education in the way he treated his subjects. So there are police in the story who stop this man, but the way they approach the man is very well-mannered. And it makes me remember American Graffiti by George Lucas. In 1972, he made the film set in 1962, when police officers were very, very human, as compared to later when they have their hand on their gun and they stand at a distance and tell them to spread their legs and put their hands on the car and things like that. So times changed, and if you look at Hafsham's films today, you can feel this change today. And the second film, Mechanic, was also quite similar. He had all manner of people. So there were Eurasians, there were Indians, and so on. And I did the opening 5-minute opening title sequence, or the longest ever done. And it was a collaboration between him and myself, where I did the storyboard and he commented and so on. He was a man who had a lot of ideas. Okay, next. So in Singapore, 1950s, P. Ramlee was guilty of stereotyping and mocking the other races in his films. So all these Chinese and Indians in the film were all played by Malays and not Chinese or Indians. So they spoke typically in the manner of how they spoke in the 1950s. The Malay was not so good. And in Seniman Bujang Lapo, we see the Chinese squatting, very typical of Chinese in those days. And he has this hat, so very much like what they would wear in China. And he's a very simple man. All he wants is to make some profit, and so he has to buy bottles and newspapers at very low cost. Then he has Indians, the husband quarreling with the wife. So it's very typical in those days where it's male patriarchy. Then in Alibaba Bujang Lapo, the Chinese refuses to do what the girl wants until he is paid quite a bit of money. So in a sense, he's saying the Chinese are very greedy, they will do anything for money. And in Madu Tiga, three wives, this Chinese man, dressed typically like the Chinese in China, wants to commit suicide. And Piramli is standing on the right. He tells him, hold this flag and wait here, and your God will come, something like that. So today, if you do this, there's going to be a lot of problems. Next. And similarly, in Madu Tiga and another film called Tiga Abdul, Three Abduls, you can see that the first wife is playing with Chinese, other Chinese wives playing mahjong. And in the same film, he's hallucinating. He's going to marry another woman, and he's dictating a letter to his Chinese secretary, but he hallucinates. He thinks she is the girl that he's going to marry. So why use Chinese? Why not a Malay? And in Tiga Abdul, there is a party, and the two brothers, Piramli's two brothers, are enjoying themselves with girls, but he stands alone. And then two non-Malay women are looking at him as if enticing him, but he ignores them. So he was a little bit guilty of stereotyping in those days. But somehow or other, because he made everything very funny, people did not really take offense. Okay, next. So with a multiracial country and Malaysia being at the crossroads of the world, we think that Malaysian filmmakers would have incredible stories to tell. But in reality, the path is full of mines. As some filmmakers have found, for instance, like Tek Tan, who did only one film called Spinning Gasing, and finally he removed himself from the industry totally. So next. And then came the millennium, and we saw a big change. And the change did not come from the mainstream industry. It came from this group of young filmmakers who all this while wanted to make feature films to tell their community stories. But the cost was phenomenal, because you needed at least R1 million to be able to hire equipment, to pay professional actors and so on. And then what happened? Next. Now, before I come to the indie filmmakers, I have to mention two things. One is, parallel with the rise of the digital indie filmmakers in year 2000, there were two other filmmakers in the mainstream who were making film, Muhammad Khalid and Yasmin Ahmad. So Yasmin was the one who actually inspired and motivated the young filmmakers, because she was doing basically the same thing, but on a more expensive scale. The next one is, the Film Club of Malaysia. This was established in 1974 by Said Alwi, the playwright. So in 1973, I was working with him on a documentary. I was doing some animation and some maps and titling. And then he told me that he was going to start a film club and show films of world cinema, like films of Kurosawa, Satyajit Ray, Fellini, and so on, which we never ever got to see. We only read about it in the books. So I said, okay, so I was a founder member, and today I'm the only surviving founder member of the film club. Now, this film club, when what's his name? Wong Tak Cheong became president. That's him on the top left photo, standing on the right. So he is an incredible man. Single-handedly, almost, even though at the beginning he had a committee, he was the one who actually promoted the films of the indie filmmakers, first with the shorts, by sending them to international film festivals. And because he was also a NETPAC committee member, NETPAC is a network for the promotion of Asia Pacific films. So he had access to film festival. So he was right in the forefront promoting them. And then, of course, later through the feature films. So our theater was the small auditorium at Help University. So sometimes after the shows, we would gather together at the coffee shops and have a long talk about the film that we saw. And then we also had discussions about the films after they were screened. And we also had conferences, and we had foreign filmmakers coming in. We had Chai Ming Liang, I remember, at one time. And then we had Nick Diocampo from the Philippines. And then Hertan Zuilhoff, from the director of the Amsterdam Film Festival, who came looking for films. So a lot of things happened because of the film club, and there was this venue to show. Because at that time, you couldn't show short films anywhere, except maybe for the universities where the students made it. But this was almost like a commercial cinema, except that we didn't have to pay for it. And then in the bottom right-hand photo, I'm moderating a session. Now, even though I was not a committee member of the club, but I used to help out because Wong Tak Cheong would ask me to be the moderator and sometimes give my opinion of the films and so on. So that's Dato' Kamil Osman in the center, wearing a black shirt, who was on the panel. And finally, he became the Director General of the National Film Development Corporation for 2 years. And he was a film buff. And of course, he used to come very frequently to see our films. And even when he was the Director General, he was the only Director General who would ever show up with one of his staff to continue seeing this, to see what was happening on the ground so that he can make the right decisions for the film industry. Next to him is Nick Diocampo, who is a filmmaker as well as an academician and a scholar with whom I have collaborated on. He edited a book where one of my articles on Malaysian cinema came about. Next. Okay. Just before I come to this, I need to mention that there was always full house whenever the short films were shown at the club. And two people, can you go back to the earlier slide? Okay. On the top left photo, the Europeans with the dark suit is the late Benjamin McKay. Now, he was a very strong supporter of the short films made by the young indie filmmakers, as I was. And he and Dr. Khoo Gek Cheng of Nottingham University, Malaysia, were the only three people who were continuously writing about these young filmmakers' works, and some of it was published in international academic journals and books. And Benjamin McKay himself wrote a book called Fringe Benefits, which is still available. And he wrote about Yasmin's films and digital indie filmmakers' books. So what you are getting now is actually primary source, because I was involved with the filmmakers, not in their production, but watching what they have done, then writing about it, and then knowing what also went on behind the screen. So you can see there is Amir Muhammad there, in the bottom left hand, Yasmin Ahmad and Ho Yu Hang. Yu Hang and Amir were the pioneers. And on the top right hand, this was a shot taken after the screening of one of the films. And there is Akashdeep Singh, who also did some short films, and Yasmin Ahmad, who inspired his films. And then there's Aaron Chung, he also did some shorts and a feature film. And the one wearing the dark shirt is Yasmin Ahmad's very good editor, a young man called Effendi, who edited Hafsham's film Mechanic, and he won the Best Editor Award for that. And there's Wong Tak Chong, and then at the bottom on the left is Yu Hang. Okay, next. So Dr. Koh Gek Cheng says in one of her articles that what these people have done is an act of citizenship. So it's a solidarity with fellow citizens, that means fellow filmmakers, regardless of politics. And you can, I do not know whether this is available. It's in the book called Misplaced Democracy, Politics and People. So there's an element of politics there because Yasmin Ahmad also questioned some of the policies of the government, and this ruffled a lot of feathers. Next. So the revolution happened in the year 2000, but a year before in Indonesia, there was this Indonesian filmmaker, Rudy Sujarno, if I'm not mistaken, shot digital films, and then he made feature film, and there was no cinema to show it. So what he did was he went from university to university, village to village to screen it with his own projector. So that was the earliest example of digital cinema. And then, of course, Amir Muhammad knew this, and then he was following this production called Buka Api, which is the word means open fire, is a slang among the sex workers in an area in Kuala Lumpur. So he followed this group, and it was shot almost like a documentary, but it had a narrative to it. And what he found out was that it was not being shot on film, it was being shot on videotape. And he found that the cost was so low, and he had the idea, hey, we can also do this. And so he got all his friends together, and I think it was almost everybody working for free. And he came up with the film Lips to Lips. Now, any film has got to go to the censorship board. But I may say, I sweated blood and tears. I'm not going to let them cut my film. So what did he do? He did something very brilliant. He called it a multimedia theater. So he screened it at the Dataran Merdeka, where independence was declared. So he was, in a sense, declaring his independence from the mainstream and everything connected to it. So it was shown at the, what was the name of the theater?
Actor Studio?
Actor Studio, yes. And he had James Lee, was also acting in the film, acting in front of the audience. Then the light dimmed and the film was projected. Then the film stopped and James Lee appeared again until the end of the film. So it was not a film screening, it was a play, and the name given was a multimedia theater. Very clever. So, of course, he couldn't be charged because it was not a film screening. So Amir was very progressive in his thinking because his background was literature, and he also studied film. And then he went on to make more films. Next. So together with him were two other pioneers at the very beginning, Amir with James Lee and Ho Yu Hang. So James Lee collaborated with him quite a bit, together with a few others as technical people. And one of my former students, Isazali Mat Isa, was his technical advisor, and also I think the editor, if I'm not mistaken, who is now quite a big name in the industry. So together, these people broke all the rules and showed that it can be done, and you didn't need a lot of money. So of course, this ruffled the feathers of the mainstream filmmakers and producers who spent millions, and then here come this group of upstarts spending almost next to nothing, and yet their films, they wanted it to be screened in the cinema. So actually a few of the films they made went into the cinema. But of course, the audience was not there as compared to the mainstream filmmakers. Okay, next. So 4 films by Amir Muhammad ruffle the feathers of the establishment. So it actually could have become a persona non grata. So I think he was given a call from upstairs. So these 4 films, The Big Durian, was about this incident in Kuala Lumpur where an army private ran amok at one of the, in Chowkit, very famous working class area, shopping area. And then of course the army came in and everybody panicked, thinking, it was going to be another racial riot like 1969. I think this was sometime in the 1980s. So actually, it was a mockumentary. And he had great fun doing it. And we saw it. And it was something totally different, unlike anything we have seen before. So it has gone to many international festivals. The Last Communist, there were no communists in the film. But the film was banned. Why? Because the word communist is a dirty word in Malaysia. They always keep emphasizing that these communists are public enemy number 1. And even though there are no more communists, this bogey of the communists keeps getting raised up by the establishment from time to time, especially during the elections. So what Amir Muhammad did was, he took a journey from the birthplace of Jinping, the leader of the communists in the 1950s, and then traced his journey through the small towns to see the locations and what they look like, have the people become communists or not. Then he did one called Apa Khabar Orang Kampung, or radio days, in the time when there were no television, only radio. So he went to South Thailand, where the remaining communists were now settled in a village, and they were all ordinary people. They didn't have the communist ideology and so on, and I interviewed them, and this film was also banned. And then the next one he did was Malaysian Gods. So this was another sensitive subject. It was about the reformasi of 1988, I think, of Anwar Ibrahim, who was sacked from the cabinet as a deputy prime minister, and what actually happened after that. So that was quite, I would say, a watershed in Malaysian politics, where we began to see resentment and opposition to the ruling party, which we never saw before. So again, this gets banned. So next. So this is the stills from The Last Communist. So what Amir did, he retraced the journey, and he met Indians, Malays, and Chinese. None of them had become communists. So why is this specter of the communists necessary now? So at the end, I think towards the end, he had a Malay man who had lived during the communist time. He was a young man, and a communist woman had approached him to get to help from him, and then he actually told the British that his own uncle, a Malay, was one of the communists, and he was very happy because he got paid for it. So I think this was the thing that rankled the authorities. Next. So he kept on making controversial films, but now he was a bit smarter. In Journey to Terengganu, he took another journey from Kuala Lumpur. He went to Terengganu, a state on the east coast of Malaysia, and he used some text from a book written by Munshi Abdullah. I think it was the 16th century in Malacca, who went along on this journey to look at the east coast states to see the conditions. And he criticized the Malays, he criticized the aristocrats, he criticized the royalty, that they were not helping the people and the people were living in squalor and so on. So Amir wanted to know, have there been any changes? This is a very clever film, and perhaps the subtitle could have been How to Criticize Royalty and Get Away with It. So it's a very interesting film to see. I spoke about this in Malacca after a screening. Next. So the pioneers, James Lee, one of the pioneers, his films, the first one was Snipers, made in 2001, just a year after he had worked on Lips to Lips. And then there were other films, Communist Gangsters in Abing Returns, and then Room to Let, about the alienation of two young men living in the city, and they are living in squalor, and one of them is sitting near a window. In the distance, we see the Petronas Twin Towers, or was it the KL Tower, I forget, to show how distant they were from the progress, the so-called physical progress of Malaysia. And then Beautiful Washing Machine was shown commercially. I think it was in Korea and also in Thailand. And this was about a washing machine, and a woman comes out of it. And then there's this guy who lives with her. I saw it a long time ago. I'm not very sure, but it's a film worth watching, and it's won awards. Next. And Yu Hang made two digital feature films before he went on to mainstream cinema. The first one was Min, about a young Chinese girl who had converted to Islam, and then Sanctuary, about two Chinese brother and sister who were living on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, but it looked as if that they had no future. So very subtly, he was telling about how the Chinese are the people who are sidelined, who become a minority. Next. And then, of course, other filmmakers came in. Chief among them is, of course, Tan Chui Mui. And there was Azharuddin, Deepak Kumaran Menon, who did The Gravel Road. And then Azharuddin, who made Pungguk Rindukan Bulan, about a block of residential flats that were going to be demolished in Johor, from where you could see Singapore in the distance and how advanced that they were. And then Erwin Abraham did a feature called Scully, about 5 friends of different races, and how it is so difficult for a few of them to be non-Malays. And Namron made a film called Gedebe, which means gangsters, and it was actually about the politics of Malaysia. So he had two groups of people, punks and skinheads, who are at war with each other, and it was to a certain extent based on Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. So Caesar is killed, so there's an investigation. But you can see very clearly in the way the dialogue is written and the way it is shot, that it is actually about about Mahathir and Anwar Ibrahim at that time. And the cameraman was James Lee. And for a first film, this was really very well done. And I think you should show this sometime in your class, because something very, very different, and it was very subtle in its criticism. Next. So Love Conquers All stands out, and while speaking about their estrangement from the mainstream, the Chinese, the film also talks about how the Chinese in the film are actually degrading their own race. So there is a man wearing long sleeve and looking very officious. Maybe he's a corporate figure or maybe a politician, but he is up to no good. And then there is this pimp who pretends to be in love with her, but is actually using her for prostitution. So this is another example of how the Chinese have no place in Malaysian society. Next. And in Flower in the Pocket by Liu Seng Tat, who had made short films, and he was actually an animation graduate who went into live action filmmaking. And James Lee acted in this film as a man, as a single father who makes mannequins. And he seems to be more at home with the mannequins than with people, because we hardly see him interacting with people outside his shop. So another subtle example of the estrangement of the Chinese. And then there is a Malay girl. The two Chinese kids go to the house and have food together with her, and she behaves like a boy. So it is as if he's saying that she has a loss of identity. Next. And there was a very blatant act of citizenship. PTO initiated the making of 15 Malaysia. This was actually making fun of the slogan, One Malaysia. So he came out with 15 Malaysia, made by 15 filmmakers with 15 different stories. And Yasmin Ahmad also had one called Chocolate here. So this was an act of citizenship for the elections of the 2009. So who knows, maybe it actually helped the opposition party. Next. So by this time, there was a slow fade out of the Little Cinema. So I forgot to mention that these indie filmmakers doing everything digitally and at low cost were called the Little Cinema by Dr. Anwar Noor Arai, a film and theatre graduate, because he was running parallel to the mainstream cinema, high cost, and theirs is low cost, and making use of non-actors and their own friends coming together to help. Now, why did this Little Cinema slowly fade out? We already predicted it. Why? So back to what I was saying at the beginning. Where are our roots? Our roots have to be in Malaysia. But many of the filmmakers were influenced by films from Hong Kong, from Taiwan, from Japan, and from India, not from Malaysia. So that was the reason for the slow fading out. So it is important for them to understand that being in the Nusantara, Malay society, Malay identity, and Malay civilization actually has to be noted, not for them to take over. But James Lee did do one film about Malays, and a few others also did the same thing. So for that, you have to go deep to understand this. Now, Deepak made a film called Chalangai, and in the film, there is a Malay dance teacher, an actual dance teacher, teaching the Indian classical dance, and his students are all Indians. So he went to India to study it. So in a sense, Deepak is saying that only when you go into the culture of someone else will you actually understand what it is all about. So there should be interchangeability and there should be interaction rather than separating yourself. Next.
Before that, Pak Hassan, I would like to ask a question, perhaps for the students, based on your point just now, that when you commented about the fading out of this Little Cinema, you linked it back to the very beginning of the slides where you quoted phrases from Professor Muhammad Najib Saleh and also Professor Gauss, talking about the artists traditionally were very much in touch with his world, you had keywords like roots, spirituality, religion, and you link it back to that as a cause to why this little cinema faded out. So, but then at the same time, I see that now we have other races than the Malays in Malaysia, being Malaysian as well, coming out with representation of their races and cultures on screen.
Yeah.
So why then do they still need to include in that representation the Nusantara or the Malay archipelago, as you said?
Okay, this is quite problematic. When the immigrants came to Malaya, Malay, Chinese, Indians, and so on, now these people came not for adventure, but they were all wanting to survive. It was all about food and shelter and a future for their children. A philosopher will never leave his country. Just look at Zhang Yimou in China. His films were censored, his films were banned, but he never left China. So we have Ang Lee, who left Taiwan, went over to Hollywood, and of course a few other filmmakers, but others, including our filmmaker Uwe Haji Shari, he had offers, but he's never going to leave Malaysia, even though his films have no audience like Chai Ming Liang and so on. But Chai Ming Liang had to move over to Taiwan because that was the only place where he could do what he wanted, but he was not going to do Kung Fu movies or Hollywood style movies. He just has done what he needed to do. So, and I quote Dr. Anwar Noarai. He said that Malaysian soil is not fertile, which means that it cannot create great thinkers, great filmmakers, great musicians. Why? Because the descendants are all from people who came here only looking for food. There were no thinkers. So the DNA is not good. That's what he meant by the soil not being fertile. But of course, now today, with our filmmakers, musicians, artists, writers, going overseas for study, but coming back, are they doing something that we can call Malaysian? So where is this Malaysian really about? So you can see Uwe, he was about 14 years in New York. But when he came back, he was making a film showing Malays as they were. And he was exploring about why are they what they are, from his first film until his last film. And even Dane Said, when he came back from London, he was an artist. He was also an installation artist. So when he made Bunohan, you could see that culture of Kelantan appearing in the films. And he was taking an objective look, not subjective enough, like what Uwe has done. And Said Alwi himself, he was writing in English before. So when he came back from the US, he was writing in Malay, and he was going into Malay society. So all his stage plays, quite a few I have seen, and you can see that Malayness coming, and he even made fun of English words coming into the Malay language. So I think that's one of the reasons why the establishment was upset with him, and he only had one or two, I think it was two of his plays that went into Istana Budaya, the National Theatre. And other than that, he was always either at the Dewan Bahasa or in the PJ Civic Center. So that was so sad for him. And when he received an award as a national artist, I was there, and he said, we artists, we do not want awards. We only want the opportunity to do our work. And it was so pitiful to hear him say that. So he is a real artist, like the artists of old. So after the veteran filmmakers and veteran artists and actors from Singapore one by one died, all these traditions died with them. Otherwise, you can see that people like M. Amin, who acted as Hang Tuah in the film Hang Jebat, when he came to Malaysia, he maintained that attitude, that thinking, and that philosophy that was there from old days. Now it is all gone because almost everybody has become a capitalist, doing things for money. Of course, money is important for survival, but money should always be number two. So even if you are not paid in full, you are still okay. Like M. Amin was asked, you acted in this drama, but they only paid you 50%. He said, God has destined me to get only 50%. I am okay with that. Of course, we I don't think we can accept that philosophy, isn't it?
Yeah, but Pastor, still on the same point, is it not just natural for filmmakers like Uwe and also Din Said, being Malays themselves, and although having lived abroad in the West and studied abroad, isn't it just natural for them when they come back that they would explore problems, like you said, of their own race and culture about the Malays? But why then? So it makes sense there, right, to go back to their roots. But why is it then that, is it not enough for people like filmmakers who are not Malay, like Seng Tat, Yu Hang, James Lee, to just explore about their own race, the Malaysian Chinese? Is that not enough?
Okay, so when the Chinese came over from China, Indians came over from India, they brought that culture. So for a time, they were quite deep into it. But as time went by, a little bit of the Malay element went into it. For instance, you have the Baba and Nyonya. See, they speak Malay, they dress like Malays. And then much of their, I think quite a bit of their culture also was influenced by Malays. And then the Portuguese came, and the Portuguese influence also came into Malay society, like the words like pesta, which is from fiesta, things like that. Now, what should the Chinese and Indian filmmakers today draw upon? Should they be looking to the country of their ancestors, of their fathers, or what? So, the political situation has actually made it very difficult for them. And I think there is a sense, a little bit of loss of identity, and maybe there's an element of trauma also for them, that the government has got to be Malay dominated. So according to the main ruling party, it has to be that way. So even though the opposition party made headway, and now Penang is under the DAP, the mainly Chinese dominated party, and they're trying their very best to make it a Malaysian party. But I think Lee Kuan Yew already said it very much earlier, the Prime Minister of Singapore. He said that even if the opposition party takes over, it won't be for long, because there will be these machinations from the party that is lost, that was in power for more than 60 years. They cannot take it. So it becomes traumatic for them. So there are many factors actually. So what is important is that if the non-Malay filmmakers want to make any criticism at all, they should use the art of cinema. It should be very subtle. It's what Uwe is doing. He's criticizing Malays, but it is so subtle that you cannot see it, because his cinematic language is very, very fine. So just like P. Ramlee, he believes that he himself is a sinner. So how can he criticize other people? And it is also not in Malay culture where you should be pointing fingers at others. And this is what caused May 13, when the Chinese won so many constituencies. They went around on a lorry and told the Malays to go back to their villages. That's one thing that you don't do. you don't drop the water face of the Malays, because the moment you criticize them, you are dead. The craze comes out.
Yeah. So I remember, Pak Hassan, that I was reading some years back about the history of Malaysian cinema, and I can't remember which book and which author, but it was pointed out in there that why, as you mentioned at the beginning of your lecture tonight, why the early films during the studio days in Singapore, at the height of the golden age of Malay films, were about the Malays, because the audience were predominantly Malays. And it was quoted in that book that although there were other migrants, like you said, the Chinese coming down and the Indians coming down, brought by the British, but they were not the audience for the films, because they also, like you mentioned, associated themselves with the country of origin. So for instance, they would prefer to watch films from Hong Kong, to watch films from Southern India or from Bollywood, rather than watching films made locally. And so if that holds true, Pak Hassan, now coming to where we are now in 2022, and also touching upon this Little Cinema that you mentioned, with all the independent filmmakers in Malaysia, could it also be that even until today, that still holds true, that if you want your voice to be heard in films, in cinema, in Malaysia, you really have to consider about the Malay audience, because it is still predominantly the Malay audience. What's your opinion on that, Pastor?
Yes, I would agree with you. That is why there are some Chinese and Indian filmmakers who are making films in Malay.
Yeah.
Why? Because they want to reach out to an audience, because they are filmmakers. Without an audience, where do they go? And it's not really about making money out of it. And a director like Chew Keng Guan, who feels very much that the races should be in unity. And when he made Ola Bola, this was a call to look back at what we were before. Why is it that during British times, there were no problems like today, where you had all these Islam-based parties, and then another splinter parties and so on, each one trying to outdo the other and trying to get the support of the non-Malays and the Malays by denigrating the non-Malays. Yeah. So politicians are actually ruining the country, especially during elections, by raising all these matters. So it's actually very problematic. And I think there should be research into this to see where are we headed, because we don't have a cinema yet.
Yeah.
We just have people making films.
Yes. Yeah. Again and again, people are talking about that, Pak Hassan, about what is actually Malaysian cinema. For those who are not Malaysians, it might be puzzling for them, because because we started with Iranian cinema, then we went into Indian art cinema, Bollywood, and then later on we will go into the cinema of China with people like Zhang Yimou, and we're going to go into Japanese cinema. So in those countries, it's very straightforward, I see, Pak Hassan.
Yes.
But Malaysia, I think Malaysian cinema is we are yet to define what is Malaysian cinema, probably because the country itself is quote unquote problematic in terms of having one identity that can be represented on screen. What do you think, Pak Hassan?
Right. So the politicians need the support of their community, individual communities, supposedly so that they have a voice in parliament. But I remember Yasmin Ahmad in a forum where I was one of the panelists, somebody asked her, why in Talent Time did you put an Indian as your protagonist? And she very calmly said, it's because the Indians in this country have the most minimal voice. So she already said it very openly.
Yeah.
So this is why a lot of the Malays didn't like her.
Yeah, and in talking about the Indians, the Malaysian Indians in particular, Pak Azan, this reminds me of my classmate who was also your student, who made two different kind of films. I'm sure you know who we are talking about. Santosh Kesavan. He made independent Tamil films. Okay.
Andal and one more.
Yeah, but at the same time, he had to make mainstream Malay films. So what's your observation on that, Pasan? That a person like him has to make two different kind of films that run parallel to each other.
Right. The indie film that he made, maybe we can call him an author, okay? But he hasn't reached that level yet.
Yeah.
But the mainstream cinema, he's an artisan. That means he does it for a living.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have artisan, author, and artist. So it's very difficult to come into the next two. Yeah. So he's an artisan, he's a film director, and he needs to survive. So he has to do that. But I think he did the second one quite well. The first one was not so good, Gong, because the script was not good. But the next one, I think it was about a gangster where Awi, the rock singer, was acting. Yeah. And I could see his eye for cinematography and so on.
Yeah. Could that also be the same reason why people like Saint Tat and James Lee, if a filmmaker wants to make it mainstream in Malaysia, they have to consider the Malay audience, and the film has to be in Malay, Pak Azan?
Well, it depends on the filmmaker himself. How does he want to tell his story? If he knows his target audience and he goes in that direction, there's no problem with that. But I think James Lee has kept to the way he does his film. But when he did mainstream cinema, I can see that he is trying to make it as entertaining as possible. For instance, Sini Ada Hantu. It was a very funny film about two people telling ghost stories. It was supposed to be a ghost story, but it was not actually a ghost story. But at the end, you have a twist. That was very clever. And then he made a film called Hysteria. And you can see the subtlety. He was actually talking about the horror of the educational system, where in this school, the school kids are going into hysteria. So you have to read that into his films. So I can say that even Liu Seng-tat is maintaining his indie stance in Men Who Save the World, Lelaki Harapan Dunia, where he has fun with the characters, but at the same time, his criticism, there is a problem. It's a criticism of the Malays. Now, a friend of mine, a Malay, said, if other races are criticizing my race, I get very upset. But if I criticize, that is okay. So you have to be very careful. If you criticize any other race, you have to do it very subtly.
Yeah. Okay, we move on, Pak Hassan.
Okay, we are running short of time.
Yes.
So go back to the first one just now. All right. So these are the few filmmakers, aside from the second left, Wu Mingjin, who is a professional filmmaker, went to film school. All the rest are indie filmmakers who began with digital works. And then Ho Yu Hang did a film called At the End of Daybreak. This was Hong Kong funded, I think. And I and Yasmin Ahmad were acting in this film. We had small parts. That's me at the bottom, acting as a police inspector with Kenji Sawahi, one of our local actors. And I didn't know what the script was all about. I only received that scene. When the film came out, it was actually making a fun of the local police.
So you were the detective, Pak Hassan?
Yes. So I'm very. When they read the script, they wanted someone who wears a jacket, who is tall and looks intelligent. So you don't have to be intelligent. You just need to look intelligent. So why? Because in the film, I was as if mimicking the American style of detectives who wear this jacket, who look very intelligent, but actually they are not. And the other one, Kenji Sawahi is also one of the detectives. He has his own problem. So I end up helping him.
Yeah. Probably
Okay.
probably the only thing that you didn't do was smoking, Pak Hassan, on screen.
Ah. Okay, next. So Ahmed Muhammad Suso, the mainstream cinema, was actually about the horror of politics in the year it was made. So during this time, it was Tun Abdullah Badawi was the prime minister, and with his supposedly very intelligent son-in-law. So if you look at the film, you have Chinese, you have Indians, and you have Malays. And it's supposed to be a horror movie. Yes, it's a horror, but it's more about the horror of the politics at that time. And it was shot where? In Putrajaya. And these jokers here at the bottom were moving around as if they are dancing. They are going through silat movements. And this represents the fourth floor boys who were, in a sense, running the country at that time. Okay, in sini ada hantu. Here there's a ghost. James Lee's film is a very, very funny movie where a Chinese and a Malay who take turns driving the van, they are carrying the corpse of a dead Indian. So this is the Keluarga Malaysia or Malaysian family, all three. So in a sense, that is already making fun of that concept. So each one, to break the boredom, is telling a ghost story. And then they actually experience some ghostly things, but there are no ghosts. And the funny thing is, right at the end, the last shot is the portrait of the dead Indian, and they animated the eye winking. It was very clever.
Yeah.
So James Lee, who is a very serious person in life, is also a very funny man inside. Okay, next. So Yasmin Ahmad, her films were about a return to the traditional and the spiritual values. And she foregrounded the minorities, and she raised ethnic issues, and also touched upon the social, cultural, and religious issues. And she was calling for a paradigm shift among the Malays. So she was actually criticizing them. And of course, they didn't like it. So her films didn't really make money, but it resonated with the non-Malays and also internationally. And people began to look upon Malaysian cinema through her films and seeing the mix of characters from the various ethnicities. And you could see that the stories were very strong and so on. So she had a literary and psychological and philosophic background. So this is why her characters, through the actors' rehearsals, were very, very solid on the screen. So as I was saying, that maybe I'll come to that in a short while. Next slide.
Next.
So in 4 films, she had Chinese and Indian, mostly Chinese, coming to the foreground. And he foregrounded the non-Malays. So in Sepet, Malay girl in love with a Chinese boy. And similarly in Mualaf, it was just alluded to. But the last scene, where in an extreme long shot, we see the Chinese boy coming to the house of the Malay girl, and we can conjecture that he's in love with her and she with him. And in Talentine, it's an Indian boy in love with a Malay girl, but the Malay girl has got all kinds of blood, Irish and maybe Welsh and whatever. And in Gubra, now I have to give a bit of detail to Gubra. Gubra is a continuation of Sepet. But if you had left when the credit titles came up, you would have missed the last scene. The last scene is Orchid in bed with Jason. And whatever happened before that, it was only a dream. And Orchid tells Jason, I had the most weirdest dream that she had married someone else. So Jason did not die in the accident at the end of Sepet, but they actually got married. And then in Mohsen, we see them having a child living in the countryside. So you got to be very careful, look at the details in her films to understand all this. Okay. Next. So Sepet was about love at first sight between a Malay girl and a Chinese boy. So if you see this extreme long shot of people at the night market, it is as if she's saying, look, when you look at it from a distance, you do not know who are the Chinese, who are the Malays, who are Indians. It's just Malaysians. And then using this film language, she showed how it was love at first sight. She faded away the sound, the surrounding sound, and there was music, and it was just a girl who fell in love with a boy, never considering that he was Chinese and she was Malay. And at the very beginning of the film, the mother and the mother is a nyonya, that means a Chinese woman from Malacca, and the boy is Chinese. He's talking to her in Chinese, she's talking to him in Malay, and they have no problems in understanding each other. So in a sense saying, there are many Chinese who can speak Malay, many Malays who can speak Chinese and also Tamil. So why is there a problem? And then there is this boy who looks like Leonardo DiCaprio. He's Malay, but is more into things that are Western. And he makes fun of Orchid being in love with a Chinese boy. So she really hits out at him towards the end. Okay, next. And in Gubra, we see she ruffled more feathers. 3 religions are being depicted very visually. And at the end, she has a graphic, a quotation from Jalaluddin Rumi, and I told her to remove it because I said, your visuals are so clear that at the end, we see the Chinese praying, they have made, the husband and wife are already made up, and then the Muslim girl who is praying together with this Malay prostitute, and then the Chinese guy who's praying as a Christian in a church. The scenes are so clear, and if you look at the door in the distance, you can see the doors are like the wings of an angel, and light is coming through. It's all very positive. So why are we quarreling with each other when each one of us has our own religion and we live properly according to that religion? So, okay, next. And Muhammad Khalid, more or less making films like what Piramli did. He had Malays, Chinese, and Indians in his film. And in Lang Buana, he had, it was actually about the film industry and its problems. So there is a Chinese Kapitan, leader of the Chinese, and 2 Malay groups. So it can also be seen as also about depicting the 3 political parties, Chinese, Malay, Indian, but the Indians are not here. So Muhammad is calling for the need for all to work together. Only then can we succeed in the film industry and also as a nation. And in estate, it was about, it foregrounded Indians in a rubber estate. And in Run Goes Run, bottom right, Lari Hantu Lari, he foregrounded Chinese. The lead male actor is a ghost, and he wants to communicate with his lover. And then he included elements of a Malay song when there was a romantic scene. So this was very clever. So he was talking about how assimilating from each other's culture is the way to go. Okay, next. So in Estate and in Lari Hantu Lari, he was aiming at the Indian audience and the Chinese audience. He considers them to be part of his audience, and he did not sideline them. So at one time, he was actually pro-Malay, but later, slowly, he shifted away. And he told me this personally. Next. So another group entered the mainstream arena. They were trained in film or the arts like Chris Chong, they made this film called Sell Out and Karaoke. So Sell Out here actually means the Chinese politicians have sold their race out. So these people are now in a subway in Sell Out, and they are singing this sad song about how they are sidelined as a people in Malaysian society. And then in Karaoke, he made a Malay film about a Malay character, but in between, he showed Indians in the oil palm estate. And even though this Indian girl who is singing karaoke, if you close your eyes, you will think that it was a Malay girl singing. So very subtly he's saying that even though the non-Malays have assimilated themselves to a certain extent in Malaysian society, but they are still sidelined, they cannot make it into the mainstream. Next. Now you saw there is another group. This was a multi-ethnic group, and what they have done is they came together and made segments of films to together. It became a feature film. So in the film Chua, or Second Thoughts, Malay boy is going to marry a Chinese girl. So if you look at the poster, the chairs are like what you find in Gothic films. It's like they are going to get married, and the Chinese girl will definitely have to become a Muslim, but are their troubles over? Because a certain segment of the Malay community will always look down upon the Chinese girl. So it was there were 5 segments in the film. The same 2 actors were in the 5 segments, and the 5 directors were Chinese, Malay, Indian, and also Malay Indian. The girl is the daughter of Hafsham. Her mother is Indian, and Hafsham is Malay. So the other one is Kolumpo, made by 3 graduates of Academy Film Malaysia. They made 3 segments directed by them. It's called Kolumpo. It means Kuala Lumpur. It was more or less like slang. And it was very well done. The cameraman was Charin Pengpanish from Thailand, who had been the DOP for Dane Side's Bunuhan. So this was also very clever. And it was also talking about the Bangladeshi workers here, and about how a Malay woman has dementia and the Chinese woman helps. And the next one was also about an Indian, and I think it was together with the one on top. It was about a Malay boy, about a loss of identity and so on. And then this girl, there's an element of magical realism. She comes and then later she disappears. Next. So in Lucky Harapan Dunia, or Men Who Saved the World, Liu Seng Tat managed to get quite a big funding for this. And the physical moving of the house. In the old days, the houses were built without nails. So he knew about this, and he came up with the idea of a metaphor for moving house, that everybody in the village comes together and then they move the house from one location to another location. So there were also these 3 elements: Chinese, Malay, Indian. So we saw mostly Malays, but there is one guy among the Malays who was called Chinese, China, because he had slit eyes. And then there is an African. So of course the African stands for the Indian, who appears and everybody thinks he's a ghost. And then at the end, they burn the house. So it's a metaphor for the nation being on fire. So Seng Tat is calling for unity. This land belongs to all of us. So why should we put it on fire? And in Gado, this was about 2 groups of schoolboys, Chinese and Indian, in a school, and they are at loggerheads with each other because of the government policy favoring the Malays. Now, this was banned because under the grounds that it will cause disharmony. Now, this film was shown at Club Cine Film, the film club, and the audience was made up of everybody. But at the end of the film, there was a very intelligent discussion. There were no riots, there was nobody yelling. So there was actually no national security involvement problem here. Next. Jagat was made by a Indian director, Sanjay Perumal, and it was about Indians and their loss of identity. So some became gangsters. They were connected with Chinese gangsters. So they even lost their identity even more by praying to the Chinese god. So this was actually based on some experience of the director himself. And there's a little boy affected in this film. And if the adults cannot guide him, who else is there to guide him? So at the end, we find that he is also going to lose his identity and end up in the wrong society. Next. Now, Nemawi, who was trained in mass comm in Taiwan, he came back and he ruffled a lot of feathers because he made fun of many things. And okay, so he had to apologize. But in this film called Nasi Lemak 2.0, he was actually talking just like Mamat in Lang Buana. The film can be interpreted as something to do with the film industry, but also about the nation and the politicians and all the various races. So you can see here the late Adibano, who is teaching Tai Chi. And then the best part of the whole film was about making the best nasi goreng or fried rice. So there is a competition. And actually, it's about the Chinese political party. So he was really making fun of them. But of course, you could not see it very clearly. You have to decipher it. And the piece de resistance at the end, we have a communist wearing the communist costume and giving the communist salute on screen. And for some strange reason, this was not censored. So I said, the Communist or Party of Malaysia was the bogeyman. But somehow or other, this was passed. Okay, next. So 29 February was a film about a man who never grows old. And the setting, the background was from 1930s to the present day. So some really great CGI and matte paintings and a lot of things was so well done. And you can see the cinematography, cinematographic look also changed with the times. And then our Prime Minister declaring independence in 1957, they took the original footage and they inserted the actor, modern day actor with it. I think this is one of the really good films that have been done in Malaysian cinema. And it was about a Malay boy in love with a Chinese girl. So he never grows old, but the Chinese girl does. And at the end, there is a scene where the Chinese girl is standing in front of her character. She's young, but she's in front of this 80-year-old version of herself. So it was quite clever. I was quite surprised. Okay, next. And it was also talking about unity and so on. So Ola Bola, which was about this 1988 football game, and about it was actually used to talk about we need to be united as we were in the old days, and especially whenever there was a football game where we cheered for our team regardless of who they were. So what has happened? So as you can see, there is a grand view of the Sabah Mountains and that train that goes from Kota Kinabalu to Beaufort. And why did the director Chu have this wide views of the landscape? Next. Next. So the footballers, no, go back. So the footballers, whenever they are training, there is this wide view of mountains and green landscapes. And then there is a parallel to the greenery or the green ground of the stadium. Now, why was this important? Because he's going back, asking us to look back. Once upon a time, when God made the world, there is this unsullied landscape, and men were helping each other and living together. So that's what is running through his mind, and he depicted this through the cinematography. Next. So we see everyone cheering for the local team. So the local team is made up of Chinese, Malays, and Indians, and one of them was from Sabah. So that's why there was a scene in Sabah. And his nickname is Tau K. And he actually was the man who did the final kick into the goal. But the director decided that it has to be a Malay. So back to what we were talking about earlier. So they knew their audience, that the majority of the audience are Malays. So somehow or other, they took the chance. So this is one of the reasons why the Chinese were very upset that it was actually a Chinese who did kick the goal. But since once you take a historical incident and put it on the screen, it becomes fiction and you can do whatever you want to it. Okay, next. So this film is going to be rescreened next month. So I hope everyone will go to see this really well done film that is talking about not only unity, but also about discovering yourself and how to survive in a Malay-dominated milieu. So again, we see this element of questioning. How should the non-Malays make films in Malaysia? So the film, even though it's about a Chinese girl who has a Buddhist master and a martial arts master played by James Lee, it is, and also she almost like going to have a Malay boyfriend. So she is giving advice to young filmmakers and how to survive in the film industry. So it is to return to the basics with words of advice from the martial arts master and the Buddhist priest. So 3 things that the martial arts master tells her. He said, don't quarrel on the streets, don't go into competition, and don't tell people that you know martial arts. So in a sense, he's saying that you may understand film, but don't tell people that you, in a sense, have mastered it. That's one of the things that he has said. And then don't fight on the streets. That means don't voice out your complaints. Okay, keep quiet. Do what you are doing. And the other one is do not tell people that you know martial arts. That means that as a director, do not show off and do not go for competitions. Because once you go for competition and you win, that's going to create problems from the other communities. Okay, next. So the most recent films, 3 films are about togetherness and unity. So we can see Rise Ini Kalila, a Chinese, a Malay, and an Indian director. Saw Tiong Hin, Sanjay Perumal, it's I think Premnath, and Nick Omar. So they directed 3 segments, and it had something to do with the elections on the 2018 and how the people all came together as united to topple the Goliath that had been in power for 60 years. And then they showed some of the things that happened, some of the cheating and so on. And in Juang, it's about the COVID, the 2 years of COVID, and how everyone came together to help each other out. Also directed by 5 different directors, Malay, Chinese, and Indian. and Air Force, the movie. So this is about patriotism and about how all races came together, and it's about what do you call? We had the lead character who dies, but is not shown dying. But from the sequence of events, we know that he died on the battlefield. And we see people on the ground made up of various races helping these people from a fictitious country and making it back to Malaysia. So the question is, were these filmmakers influenced by the digital indie filmmakers and what they did in the year 2000 onwards, and about how they wanted to voice out their community's problems and issues? So that is open to debate. Next. So some thoughts on Talent Time. You have seen Talent Time. Now, when I saw these two guys on the stage, what came into my mind was this image of the shadow play. That they were actually, in a sense, continuing the storytellers of ancient days who played a violin, who beat pots, and so on, and used flutes to get their story across. And this is in school. So is in school the place where Yasmin is saying, in a sense, where we should actually teach them the right things and not to be against each other. So the Chinese boy had his problem with his father, and he was also angry at Malays being given a lot of what do you call it, benefits, and also as enshrined in the constitution that they had special rights. He had no problem with that, but of other things. So the boy also is not too egoistic about all of that, and he loves his mother, and his mother dies, and then when he sings, it comes from the heart. And even when the boy played the lute uninvited, he came and he played in sync to the boy, and he could feel the pain. Both of them had pain, and both of them understood each other. Next. And at the end, they embraced each other. Now, surprisingly, Yasmin did not include the applause from the audience who were watching them. She expected the audience who was watching the film to applaud. So I don't know whether the audience actually applauded. I would have given a standing ovation. Okay, next. So she had an Indian as a protagonist. And if you look at the shirt he's wearing, now he's deaf and dumb. But look at the shirt, it's designed in the form of two wings. So he's looking at his girlfriend, the Malay girl, playing the song called Angel. So she's actually playing the song, and that angel is he himself. Now, he cannot hear the song, but he could feel, and he's just standing there, and the face in shadow is breaking the rule. Normally, this would mean this is a bad person. But here, he has gone into another world where he actually can hear the song, being in love with the girl. And then he has the Indian, there's the mother, and there are the two sisters. And they have their own problems. And the brother, her brother was killed by Indian Muslims. Why? Because they had a death in the family. But here this man was going to be married. So there was this music, banging of drums and so on. And the other group got very upset, and there was a fight, and he was killed on the day of his marriage. So that's why she has this hate in herself. But ultimately, she comes to, comes to accept the fact that her son is in love with a Muslim girl, and she buys it. So there is this Indian culture being shown, their religious beliefs, and this man who is acting as the Hindu is actually an Indian Muslim money changer at KLCC. But the way he behaved, he was, almost method acting. It was almost exactly like a Hindu, and you can see the elements of yellow, that he was on a very spiritual level. Okay, next. And look at the way they are sleeping on the floor. This is the fetal position. It is to say that their hearts are pure like children. And when they are sitting in the park together, there are babies on the field. And whenever in a film you have children around some people, it means their hearts are like children. So it is what Jesus said, "Come unto me, little children, for it is such that will enter the kingdom of God." So if the adults' hearts are like children, they have no hate, there is no discrimination, they are the ones who will be accepted by God. And in the shot where this Malay boy is praying in the mosque, you can't see two birds because it's too dark here. When they were shooting, suddenly two birds appeared and they started moving in front of the camera. And Yasmin was totally taken aback. She never planned it, but she said, God was helping me. And when you have animals or birds with someone, it also means, like the children, that the person is pure of heart, and his prayer here is for his mother who is dying. And then in the shot at the bottom in the hospital, the angel of death has physically come to take her soul, but he waits until the problem between her and the son is solved, and she is at peace with her illness, and then he gives us finally strawberries to eat. Now, only she and the son can see him. So this is the late Jip Murad, who died recently, also acted as an angel in Spilled Gravy on Rice, the film that was screened about 2 months ago, and it will be on Netflix, I think probably next month. You should see it. Next. So, what is the word Talentine signifying here? So, she made the word N to be small, so it's like tale and time. So, it means a tale in time. That means at a certain time in Malaysia, there was this racial problem and discrimination and so on. So this film, 20 years later, will tell you about that particular, issue. Now, what is the meaning of the dance and the song? The song is a Qawwali song. It's a Sufi song, and it's about being united with God. And when she is dancing, it refers to the whirling dervishes in Turkey, where they dance round and round and round and round to be at peace with themselves and to unite themselves with God. So this is an Indian dance, and Indians dance and songs are very spiritual in nature, just like the Qawwali. So this was a film where she was very, very spiritual. So she is saying that, next, cinematic art inspires new ways of thinking about our shared identity. So what Andrei Tarkovsky spoke about was that art should be used should function as a way to go into the spiritual realm. Next. We have to use our time on earth to improve ourselves spiritually. This means that art must serve this purpose. And here is a guy from Russia talking like an Easterner. Next. So you look at the last scene in Moxin, where Yasmin breaks the fourth wall. She appears on screen while her parents are playing the piano and singing, and then her sister comes in, actual sister, and then the crew in the film all start to appear, and they are made of all ethnicities. So she's saying, this is how we work, and this is how we should live. So why should we separate ourselves based on what the politicians want? So hopefully this message goes out to everyone in Malaysia, and the Malaysian cinema should be depicting all of this. Next.
End of slide. That's the end, Pasan.
Yes.
No more.
No more. So any questions?
From the students, any questions? They have endured an extra half an hour until now. Very, very, very much informative, and we had a bit of a discussion there, but it was just you and me. We didn't hear anything from the students. Perhaps any questions from the students? Or have they gone to sleep, actually?
Or they have fainted.
No, sir. So far, so clear. So far, so good.
Okay, good. Thank you, Abraham.
So I can say that just like Indonesian cinema, where when they make films about unity, about coming together, about what is the word for it? Patriotism and so on, even though they have a main character, but what you will ultimately see is that all other Indonesians actors, characters in the film are also heroes helping to build the nation. So in the Malaysian cinema, in inverted commas, that is coming out now, we see to a certain extent that is the same thing that's happening. So hopefully this will be extended to the next generation of filmmakers, which is all of you.
Anybody? Maywin, you're silent today? Or Dashini?
Okay, they have fainted.
Yeah, probably. Okay.
Actually, there's so much more to talk about talent time.
Yeah.
Full of things.
Yeah.
And some of it is very much hidden.
And I'm actually holding myself back from asking or discussing more points with you, Pak San, because I think if we talk, it can go for hours and hours.
No.
Yeah. So probably they are being silent. No questions, because I think they are still absorbing what you have shared. But I believe you did share a lot tonight, and probably we can end here, Pak Hassan, or if you have some final words to say.
No.
Yeah.
So we wait for the next class.
Yes. So it has been 2 hours, an extra half an hour from the originally planned lecture. So they are saying in the chat that they have enjoyed tonight's lecture. Thank you very much, Pak Hassan. They say they learned a lot.
So I hope all the sessions so far have been informative. Even if you did not understand a few things, it will take time. Okay, you can't get it all at one go. But it is important for you to think about what you have heard.
Yeah.
Only when you think will your own understanding and your feelings and everything will come into play. So remember, films are all about feelings, and films are made taking into consideration the audience psychology.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you again, Pak Hassan.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So of course this is recorded and it will be uploaded on our school's YouTube channel, and I will share the link with you. And I will see you tomorrow morning, Pak Hassan, for your analysis on the film The Wedding Planner. That is for the undergraduate students.
All right.
In the film studies class. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And thank you all students as well. I wish everybody a very good night and good rest. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Sorry, doctor.